Hi, I'm Senator Alice Nitka from Ludlow, and I'm here with my Senate colleagues, Allison Clarkson and Dick McCormick, and we're filming at the Okemo Valley studio here in Ludlow, and
Close.
Close enough. Trying to make sure they have a new name, and so I'm wanting to recognize that. I'm getting used to it myself. Anyway, we represent in the Senate the 24 towns of Windsor County. It's the largest geographic county in the state, and we also represent the towns of Mount Holly in Rutland County and Londonderry in Windham County. So I'll let my colleagues go ahead and introduce themselves. Allison?
I'm Allison Clarkson, and I have, before I was served in the Senate, I served in the House representing Woodstock, Plymouth, and Reading for 12 years, which I loved. And when I had the opportunity to grow my public service, I stepped up to the plate and ran for the open Windsor County Senate seat 2 years ago and was lucky enough to win and joined Alice and Dick in the Senate. They're very different bodies, and it's been a real pleasure to be able to grow my public service in the Senate. I really believe that at its best, government expresses how we care for each other. When we can privately no longer do things, we do them as a public good, and that's everything from our roads and bridges, our schools, our workforce development, our mental health, whatever it is that we decide is a common good that we take care of each other through in terms of state budget. I serve you as vice chair of Senate Economic Development, which is terrific for Windsor County. We haven't had a Windsor County voice on that committee for quite a while, and it's been great to advocate for Windsor County in that capacity. And in the afternoon, I serve as clerk of government operations, where we oversee municipal government, state government, elections, and created the Ethics Commission, for example. So it's been terrific, and I've loved it, and I would love to be reelected. So, Dick?
Thanks. I'm Dick McCormick. I entered the Senate by appointment in 1989 to serve out another senator's unexpired term. I left for 4 years in the early aughts, but came back in '06. And have been there ever since. So it's basically a 30-year run. And I've been honored. It's every 2 years we run for re-election, and I never let myself forget that the seat, really the Senate seat, belongs to the people, not to me. And they honor me by letting me use it. And then every 2 years I come back and ask for another term, and doing it yet again. I have at one time or another been I was the Senate Majority Leader for 4 years, during which time we established tax fairness. We reformed the school tax so that X spending per pupil in one town would require the same rate as X spending per pupil in any other town. It was, I think, a great step forward. I also was a majority leader when we passed civil unions for same-sex couples, which was a precursor to same-sex marriage, which we have now, which was quite controversial at the time, but nothing much changed, so life has gone on. I presently serve with Alice on the Appropriations Committee. We do the budget, which is the big bill, and money talks, so where we spend our money is the measure of all things. And I serve as well as on the Health and Welfare Committee, which is quite a lift these days with the opioid issue and with the fact that health care is still so prohibitively expensive, or health insurance is prohibitively expensive. So I ask the people to give me another 2 years. I love the work. I love the process. I enjoy my colleagues. And I enjoy getting together with the people.
So, again, I'm Alice Nitka, and I'm serving as Vice Chair of the Appropriations Committee, which, as Dick said, does the budget. And, of course, everything that spends a dime comes through our committee, so you handle just about everything, which is very interesting. And we're extremely careful in there. We've passed balanced budgets for a number of years now. And this year, fortunately, we were able to do it again this past year that just ended. And if elected, I'm sure we'll do that again. It's very important to do that. I also am on the Judiciary Committee, which deals with all the bills that have penalties, and as well as a lot of the corrections things and the courts. I served in the House previously, representing the local area that we're in right now, and I've enjoyed expanding to the Senate. And we have great constituents out there, very diverse. You know, there's a big difference in the towns. We go from South Royalton to Londonderry, and we're from Rochester. You know, where's the end of us?
Wethersfield and
Wethersfield,
Springfield.
Springfield, Andover. Yeah, so it's a big area, and we hope that people will be in touch with us. We're very accessible and welcome to call us at home or send an email. Of course, we get way too many of them probably, but you know, it's great hearing from the people. So we had a few things we're going to want to touch upon today so that you can hear what happened last session and what we expect will be coming up again this session. So we wanted to talk a little bit about, I think, the economy first.
Yeah, well, you're on the economic development.
Yeah, well, we have addressed a number of issues that we're lawmakers, we're not business people. So we don't create businesses, but we do enable business. And this year we did a number of things, well, actually the last biennium we did a number of things to enable both housing and economic development. We passed a $35 million bond to create more workforce housing. I don't think there's anyone here who is not aware of the housing crisis in Windsor County, both of what's affordable and what's available. And so we're working with all our housing developers to work on that. We put more tools in the toolbox for the exciting project in Springfield, the BRIC project, the Black River Innovation Campus project. We put the ability for them to, we created the opportunity for TIFs, for tax increment financing, which we closed down, and we reopened that, which is very exciting. We also opened we expanded the number of downtown tax credits, which is one of the most popular ways to finance our downtown development. And we have done some expansions on workforce development, which is of course key to a lot of our developing skilled jobs, skilled workers for the skilled jobs that are required. We now have 11,000 jobs that are unfilled here in Vermont. Anyone who wants to work can find a job. There was just a big piece in the Valley News about how important, how hungry businesses are for workers. So we've created some pilots for our wonderful career and technical education centers so that we can create a more seamless experience of offering career and technical education to our high school students. And we've done some exciting things. We've focused primarily in our rural economic development, but primarily in Springfield and Windsor, which are our economic engines that need some additional help. I think Hartford, we all feel very confident that Hartford's on its way. It's employed its second TIF, and it's doing really well. It's a very exciting place to be. And there are exciting things happening in each one of our towns, and in Springfield and Windsor. But those are some of the things that we've been working on.
Yeah, I think it's also important for people to understand that we do not come down to Windsor County from Montpelier with, the 10 commandments of economic development and all that, saying, hi, we're from Montpelier, we're going to tell you what to do. We are in close touch with the town fathers and mothers in Springfield and Windsor and their plans and their ideas, and then we try to express that will at the state level. I had the great pleasure the other day of taking a day off from campaigning and driving all the way up to Albany, Vermont, which is practically Canada. But it was because the governor was making presentations of tax credits for any number of towns in Vermont, including Springfield, Bethel, Proctorsville, Cavendish.
The brewery, you might mention what some of those are.
That's right, that's a brewery in Cavendish.
Yeah.
And it's pretty
West
exciting.
Windsor too, I think, right? The
Yes,
store,
the store in
store in
West
West Windsor.
Yeah, because that store closing would have just taken the
And yeah,
heart
it's
out.
presently closed and they're renovating it,
Yeah.
so.
And the other thing I just want to mention while we're talking about the economy is that a lot of times people worry, they hear about how we're trying to balance the budget and that it's an effort to balance the budget. But it's a doable job. We actually do balance the budget every year. And the fact is, Vermont has an excellent bond rating.
Oh,
And
AAA.
Yeah, and you
Doesn't get any better.
it doesn't, and you don't, the guys on Wall Street don't give you a AAA bond rating.
Right.
Because they like you. They like how you're handling the money.
Right, and just to add to your point about the budget, we are the only state, I think, in the country that doesn't have a law requiring that we pass a balanced budget, and we are always one of the first to do so. I have not, in the 14 years I've been in the State House, we have never not passed a balanced budget.
We just do it because that's the right way to do it.
It's not easy.
No, it's not.
To be very honest, it's not easy because, the cost of living goes up. There are many wonderful programs. Everybody is continually asking for more money for their programs. In other words, we get a lot of mail, of course, and a letter came the other day. My husband says, "Oh, what's that?" I said, "It's a request for $8 million."
Oh, I got that.
Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah.
Oh, sure.
But
But,
one of the things we can do is incent programs. So in the
Right.
economy, you may have heard about the remote workers bill. We are trying to incent high-tech 21st century jobs because we're a state of entrepreneurs. We have an extraordinary people doing amazing things. And we're wanting to incent people to come to Vermont and work in our new high-tech centers, like the one that's going to be at the Park Street School, where we have in Springfield the highest gigabyte capacity in the state and fabulous infrastructure. And we're wanting people who can take advantage of our incredible outdoor recreation, our wonderful schools, our beautiful towns and beautiful countryside to come and live here and work remotely. And the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is in the process of setting up how that program will be handled, but we decided to incent that program $500,000 over 3 years, $10,000 working grant to people who come and move here to work remotely.
And a commitment over a number
And
of
a
years to be
commitment
here.
over a certain period of time. So the agency's working on the fine tuning of
Yes,
that, and
yeah.
we'll be offering that, I believe, in January. So stay tuned.
So that gets into the fact that we are constantly here. Every business is looking for employees, just about. I mean, whether it's your country store, whether it's your restaurants, and I heard yesterday a restaurant said, well, we aren't opening our back room because we don't have enough serving staff. And so we know, like, the National Guard is looking for 10,000 people, the Air Guard's looking for 10, GW Plastics has a sign-on bonus for, I think it's $8,000, and I don't know exactly which positions that's for. You have school bus companies giving a sign-on bonus for drivers and raising their rates. I know they went from like $14 an hour up to like $23 an hour, and we still don't have enough. And of course, truck drivers nationwide, there are not enough. So we're looking, everybody, we're not just the only state looking for employees. They're needed all over the place.
I have family who are
That's right.
closing their shop one day a week more than they want to.
Their pizza
Yeah, because
business.
they just can't. They
Can't get the
cannot
help.
get the employees.
So we're encouraging people, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, again, is encouraging a returnship program, which is on their website, for people who would like to return to the workplace, who may have retired early or who have taken time out of their working lives to be full-time parents, which we applaud, but is often economically challenging. And so they are encouraging a returnship opportunity for people, and you can look at that program on their website, but you can also return by applying and getting more training. There's a lot of training for people who want to return.
Right.
Of course, I don't want us to sound too cheery. We have good news, but the fact is the cost of living in Vermont is such relative to what these jobs pay that a lot of Vermonters are still struggling, and we are very aware of that. And we address those issues when we had a bill to raise the minimum wage, for example, which would have not only put more money into the pockets of workers, but it would also put more money out into the state's economy. People with money spend that money, and it goes to the local businesses.
So of course, on that issue, we hear from a lot of our constituents and others all around the state with regard to the money we could make if we taxed and regulated marijuana. So we might want to mention that. Last year what passed was 2 mature plants and 4 immature plants that someone
Sort
could
of
have.
recreational marijuana. We
Yeah.
passed
Not
the bill.
that many of these people had these plants already. So, it's not as
You
if it's, so the thought was, Canada, other states around us are going to tax and regulate. And it seems like, first of all, there is some money to be made there. I haven't been a big proponent of recreational marijuana, but I'm facing reality here that, you want whatever people are using to be safe. And some people say, I don't care if they're safe, I don't like them using it. But the fact is we need to have a safety piece in it, and sometimes there's fentanyl now mixed in with marijuana, so it really is a problem. So tax and regulate could, have a system that is regulated, so it's not, and of course it can't be too expensive because otherwise the black market will continue to flourish. And it likely, I think, will still continue, but not to the extent. And there's a lot to consider. We were at a forum in Norwich recently whereby they're trying to consider what if they have a marijuana, goes to tax and regulate, they have a marijuana shop that comes in on the main street, and then they have all the Dartmouth students marching across the bridge and smoking all over their town. So,
On the other hand, they already have a wine and spirits store, and alcohol costs this state hundreds of millions of dollars. The abuse of alcohol through domestic violence, through driving while under the influence, the real challenge, we are already spending hundreds of millions of dollars on a legal drug that we tax and regulate. And marijuana so far, from every indicator, has very few of the same challenges because it has very different effects on people.
and the governor is very concerned about the driving. And so there are now, I think we're up to 56 drug, what are they called?
Recognition experts.
DREs, drug recognition experts.
Right.
And those are all across the map. They're in the state police, municipal police, DMV people,
Right.
Department of Motor Vehicles. So
My position on marijuana has evolved. I took essentially a libertarian approach, which was just get the government off the backs of pot users and everything will be fine. I have since come to be persuaded that since we've come this far, there probably is some money to be made by taxing. I don't think we're going to make nearly the revenue on a marijuana tax that the enthusiasts expect. There are people who think that we're going to solve all the state's fiscal difficulties with a marijuana tax. I've never been convinced of that, but certainly it'll be something. It'll benefit the state's revenues. And as far as the regulation, there are people now. It's on the black market. You don't know what's there. Sometimes marijuana is laced with stuff that. Even if you're sanguine about marijuana smoking per se, you don't want some of the nasty stuff that it gets laced with. So I will support tax and regulate now.
And we do know that the medical marijuana system is working very well. I think the average age of a person using it and comes to one of the dispensaries is 58 years old. Many of them are close to death.
A significant percent of veterans are using our medical marijuana. We heard from people at the Norwich Forum the other night from somebody who wanted to make sure we were not going to take that opportunity away for medical marijuana.
Yeah, that's really safe. It's administered by the Department of Public Safety. That's been through all the hurdles, and we've expanded it through the years, and I think that the majority of people now are comfortable with the medical marijuana piece.
Right.
I was helping so many people. Somebody who was in a car accident many years ago was on opioids for years and was able to transition to medical marijuana.
And the oils and all the
oils, the
byproducts that
salves, the gels, every
and
kind
that's
of thing.
something that's, again, an economic development opportunity that's grown out of our legalizing the ability to grow hemp again. Not only can we make rope again from hemp, but we can also create all these oils that have medicinal impacts, and people are very pleased with.
But let's not be unrealistic here. There is a downside to marijuana. It has resulted in the worst poetry ever written. So.
But the other thing is, I think also people want to make sure that in the revenues that we may get from taxing and regulating, that we use it to really, and this goes to our opioid issue, and the discussion is really plow that heavily into education and prevention, because we need to turn the tide. big time on our opioid problem
Yes.
here in our opioid crisis here in Vermont, and I think that there is a significant percent of the income from the tax and regulate
That would need to go there.
Will go into a much bigger
Yes.
prevention, really funding prevention programs and treatment programs, prevention and treatment and education.
And one of the things, important things that we did, we did this the year before last with regard to the prescription monitoring program,
Right.
and also changing how much of opioid drugs a doctor can prescribe. Because in fact,
Yeah.
they were not controlling themselves, and there was too much going out there, and people were getting a renewed prescription too easily. So now all of that goes through the prescription monitoring system, which already has cut down on the number of opioids being described. Now, Dick's had a couple of. You always mention your situation where you're on, where there are legitimate uses
Yeah,
for.
I serve on the Health and Welfare Committee. And first of all, let me make clear that I think the opioid epidemic in our state is our worst problem
Terrible.
right now. And I think Governor Shumlin came up with the program that we are still under, the basic structure of which is that the addict is treated as a sick person in need of and deserving help to get over the addiction. The pusher, the seller, is treated as a criminal. Now that distinction gets a little bit muddy when you realize that there are addicts who turn to selling the drugs as a way of supporting their habit. And so you get dealers who themselves are probably addicts. But one way or another, the approach is to help addicts recover. And that is, and we're not doing enough, and largely because it costs a lot of money. And when people say, well, the state spends too much money, well, the state certainly spends more money than it wants to. I'd love to have no taxes at all if we could get away with that. But there are things that are necessary, and one of them is helping with drug rehabilitation. I have taken what is somewhat of a minority point of view, which is while we're cracking down on the abuse of opioids, which are painkillers, we should recognize that painkillers per se are a good thing. Pain is a terrible thing. If anyone has ever seen a loved one with a certain, say terminal cancer or something like that, the fact that we can provide pain relief is a good thing. The opioid epidemic is a misuse of a good thing. And we have to also, I have been leery that we would be so strict in limiting access that we'd end up allowing people to suffer in pain when they don't have to. I have actually, at my urging, the Senate Health and Welfare Committee took up that question this last year. We had doctors in, we talked to the Vermont AMA, and so far it actually does not appear to be a problem. But I think it's something we want to keep looking out for.
And so while we're on this, we just wanted to mention the issue of a couple of bills that we passed this past session, one with regard to the cost of prescription drugs, and also the potential for, we're looking at, through a study, importing some of the most expensive drugs from Canada. Similar program that was going on years ago that Bernie Sanders had, but this would be very different. The state would be the place doing it, and that looks like it could come under the regulation. So your committee...
We're very hopeful for that.
Very hopeful for that to maybe work.
For drugs than anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And most of them are manufactured here in America.
Yeah, and
they
the same
get
drugs.
sent to Canada.
And then
this is a reimportation
Yes.
program that would reimport the drugs we manufactured to sell at a much lower level.
And we know they were legitimate drugs. They're not coming in
Yeah.
fake ones. So that's hopefully something will come of that. We're awaiting that study.
Because we got people going on the desktop and buying their
Yes.
drugs, through the internet, and maybe they're getting something and maybe they're not. So the time flies. Do we have time to just say a few words about climate change?
Yes, and I think you wanted to just mention the Act 250 study too.
And,
we have
and
time
a little
to...
on Act 46.
Yeah,
Oh,
we have,
yes, yeah.
We have a bunch of studies, which often people take a very jaundiced view of studies, that we commission them because we don't have the will to actually pass a bill, so we require a study. But we want to know...
You can't get the votes. You can't get the
that's
votes.
Right, so you do it. In some ways, a study is a booby prize, but it's a good booby prize because it gets the information.
Yes.
And we there are things we probably want more. Certainly, I remember on healthcare reform years ago, we had a whole study that really was precipitated. A bill I had to study healthcare access, precipitated mainly by Senator Nitka, who kept asking me questions I couldn't answer. I said, okay, we need a study on this. So we're going to be studying what the state can do about climate change now that under President Trump we've sort of pulled out of the Paris Accord. And one of the things we can do we maybe can do is carbon pricing, in which you may or may not include a tax on carbon bearing fuel and so on, but would have to make working people whole, and they'd have to get that money back somehow if they're using it to heat their houses or go to work. And there are skeptics who are saying we can't actually do that. And so we're going to have a study to see how that would work.
And we've hired Resources for the Future, this terrific crowd in Washington, to conduct, and we've had 2 public forums. I was at one in Woodstock a couple weeks ago, and they're looking at the cost-benefit analysis of doing carbon pricing here in Vermont, and proposing specific suggestions for how we do that, how we make it fair and equitable, so that it's not regressive on low-income Vermonters. But we have one Earth. We have to be better stewards of this one Earth. In light of the UN climate report of this week, it's appalling the lack of progress we're making, and we have set some fine goals here in Vermont. But we really need to start turning this ship
And
around.
you might mention a few of the things that we did with the Volkswagen money.
Why don't you? Because you guys dispersed it.
With regard
just to finish on the Resources
yes,
for the
and I
Future
want you to
project,
mention.
we'll be getting that report back, and we'll be creating legislation around it. We try and incent good behavior or disincent bad behavior, and we want to incent people moving off fossil fuels, because we know our climate. We've just had the hottest year on record. None of us want to live on Mars. We all want to live here. Climate change threatens so many of Vermont's key core businesses. Ski industry, sugaring, logging, and all forest products, and tourism. So Vermont has a huge amount to gain by turning the ship around, and a huge amount to lose if climate change makes any further inroads.
So we did, just with the Volkswagen settlement money, and that's limited to what it can be used for in terms of, the climate and clean air, things like that. So there is a lot of money being put into buses to change engines over from diesel to electric. That's one of the things going on. Yeah. And the other thing is a big effort to get more charging stations, because it is difficult if you're trying to drive a long distance and you have to wait and get your car charged and all of that. It's not so convenient. Everybody says, well, it's not, there aren't gas stations all over, but when you go to the gas stations, you pump it and you're done, whereas the charging station, you have to stay there for a while.
Which is an economic opportunity for some of our rural towns where people have to be for 20 minutes.
Grab a cup of coffee.
So,
it is.
More than a cup of coffee.
A lot of them are at shopping centers.
Exactly.
And I see the ski areas put in from Tesla, not the superchargers, but there are, I think, like 13 or 14 of them at Okemo. There's another big batch at Stratton. These are areas around here, another big batch put in at Killington this winter, and places are putting them in all over. Of course, a lot of people with non-electric cars park in the space and block the charger. So there's things to be worked on. We have that happen at Skate House. We have that happen too. There's 2 chargers. I see people block other people.
But and just one further thing on carbon pricing. It isn't owned by any one party. In fact, some of the most conservative financial people in America, James Baker and George Shultz, and many other very conservative economists, have come out supporting carbon pricing, because they feel strongly we have to incent better behavior if we're going to keep the world that we know and love.
So this is a very controversial thing in the legislature.
It's very controversial everywhere, but it is becoming less so with more buy-in from environmentalists. And environmentalism and loving our planet should know no party. It's such a nonpartisan issue.
It is a nonpartisan issue.
It should be.
The concern is for poorer people who have a gas guzzler car and have to pay a lot, have to use a lot more gasoline, or people, during the last oil crisis, it was really extremely sad what happened to a lot of people in terms of couldn't pay their fuel bills. So we do have to be very careful.
But the model is if a low-income person is paying a tax on their fuel oil, and then that tax goes into a fund to help subsidize weatherization, and they improve the insulation of the house, they actually end up not only paying less money total, paying less taxes because they're not using as much fuel.
Eventually, if they're
so
able to get their home weatherized.
And in fact, we talked about this at that public forum.
Yeah.
We talked about perhaps creating like a health savings account that that every Vermonter would have an account set up where the money was dispersed into those accounts, and you would be able to spend it on either weatherization or solar, on anything that would bring down your carbon footprint.
And we're not going to do it if it has all the bad effects that some people are predicting. If that were the case, then we won't do it. That's why we're having a study.
Right.
And it has to pass.
And Act 46, should we chat? We have a couple other things because our time.
Do we have time?
We don't really.
Yeah, we'll just go over.
Okay.
Okay.
But why don't we talk about the other two issues we wanted to chat about?
Okay, let me just say on Act 46, very briefly, even people who were against it recognize that it is passed, it is the law. There are people who hated Act 46 who are still trying to make it work. For the fact is there is one element of Act 46 that's already in the law, and that is that it allows for flexibility for the outlier, for the school that the whole world envisioned by Act 46 actually doesn't work. And I think that's certainly what we're going to be working on
And
now,
we did have,
flexibility.
we do have in that, we did have and still do have in what passed a statement that if you don't want to close your school, you don't have to. And so there are several schools that have voted absolutely no, no, no about 4 times. And they've said, we're not closing, and now they've joined a lawsuit. But the thing of it is, we'll know by the end of the month, by the end of, I think, November.
The state school board.
The state school board will be making a decision on these plans that these schools that don't want to close have submitted. And there is concern that our statement that you don't have to close if you don't want to is being disregarded in some of the cases. So we need to take a look at that and see what we might do to ensure that what we did pass is being honored.
Right. But I think it's important for us all to remember that education in the country and in this state has evolved over the last 200 years. And sort of every 50 years, there seems to be some effort to improve opportunities, to be more efficient, to be thoughtful about taxpayer dollars. I mean, the number one concern we always hear about is property tax. And the challenge of people, even people who are income sensitized, feel the pressure of property tax, and sadly, that's education funding. Now, we have not increased at the statewide property tax spending for the residents of this state. A very modest increase for the businesses and seasonal residents this last year. But education does evolve, and we all have to appreciate that, particularly with the declining population that we have. We do have to figure out how to provide our students with a competitive world-class education, because competition for those skilled jobs is going to be fierce, and they need to be well educated.
So on that same note, last year, what we did do was with regard to teachers' health insurance, which is an extremely expensive part of every school's budget. So last year, well, the same year, 18, we did pass a piece to have a statewide teachers contract after a great deal of negotiation and compromise and having every player at the table, so that cost will be on a statewide contract. The teachers agreed with it, voted for it, the unions voted for it, and it was a lot of work. It's great, and we believe it will save money for schools in the long run. And teachers will be protected with good insurance. So I think that's a piece that will reduce property taxes eventually, or at least keep them stable.
So are we ready to begin to wrap it up?
You wanted to mention Act 250.
Yeah,
yes, please.
There will be a report coming from, there's a commission on Act 250 at 50. We're approaching the 50th anniversary of Act 250. And the question that we are examining I was just in Montpelier yesterday for a meeting of this commission. The questions are, what has changed? What is there anything about Act 250 that has maybe become outdated? Well, one example, in the 60s, the problem was so many people moving in so fast. What are we going to do with this influx of humanity? And the development pressures. Now the problem is, what are we going to do with the labor shortage? The other thing is that Act 250, as conceived in 1970, makes no mention of climate change, no mention of global warming. And we're trying to figure out ways to, but I'm getting ahead of myself, because the fact is the committee has not really finished its work. But one of the issues that has been raised a lot is, how do we address climate change in Act 250? Then we also have heard well, we've been hearing for 50 years the complaints from some people that Act 250 is well-intended, hooray for the environment, but it makes it too difficult to do business. We are examining that. As usual, these are outliers. The real Act 250 horror stories are not representative. But there's still the question of, what about a business person who is willing to play by the rules? Maybe because they're enlightened and they love Vermont's environment, maybe because they figure, the path of least resistance is to play by the rules, and time is money. One way or another, when someone wants to play by the rules, wants to do it right, it should not be unduly time-consuming or expensive. Right. And I say that as arguably one of the greenest members of the legislature. Certainly not the greenest, I know. But in any case.
But I would add, that ties into what Alice was saying earlier, which is often when we, there are always, every session, lots of little bills put in on how to improve Act 250.
Yeah.
And so we finally said, you know what, let's not nickel and dime poor Act 250. Let's take a comprehensive look at Act 250, which
Yes.
is what your commission has been. They've had public forums all over the state. They have been very interesting, but they have gotten lots of information. But it really does need to be addressed, because we need to make affordable housing bumped into a bunch of challenges with Act 250, where the neighbors could
Woodstock.
appeal and appeal and appeal, and by the time 10 years has gone by, the project is no longer affordable. We're no longer creating housing that our workforce can afford. Yeah. So
right.
There are so many pressures on Act 250.
And West Windsor wanted to revitalize what had been the Mount Ascutney ski area, and it's a whole new, very different project. And the question there was, how does a very old Act 250 jurisdiction apply? And their view was that, for one thing, a lot of land had been subdivided, and every landowner was subject to Act. And so that's the kind of stuff we're looking at, to try to make it act more smoothly. But I think Act 250 has not only been good for our environment, it's been very good for our economy. It's consumables is one of the growth industries in our state.
And we did last year, if you'll remember, put in a position in the governor's office with regard to someone who will help businesses march through not just Act 250. I think really the biggest hang-up now are the permits from the state. Water is a huge one. And so we put in money so that someone can be there to give guidance to businesses.
Right.
So they aren't just, where do I go?
So they'll have a mentor. And that ties in, again, an economic development thing we did, which was the portal, the one-stop portal, so that when you're a new business in Vermont, you will go one place through the Secretary of State, and you will be able to interface with everything from the Agency of Natural Resources to tax. And then you will also have a mentor.
You're right. It's the Secretary of State's office, not the governor's office.
But
it will help everybody, and that's one of the main
surprises.
complaints.
You want to give people fewer
surprises. Or where to go. People
Yeah.
don't know.
So I think maybe our time is up, but I think we'd like to remind people that the State House is the people's house, and if we're lucky enough to be reelected, which we hope we are because we all love serving and want to continue to serve you, we'd welcome you at the State House. It's helpful if you give us a heads up, but it's a very stimulating day out on a cold day here in Vermont. You can come up and listen in on committee meetings, have lunch with us, see the action on the floor in the House and in the Senate, and we would love to have you come and partake in the people's business.
And
that's
that's a good way to close it. We want to remind you the day to vote is
yeah.
Tuesday, November 6th. So that's the date.
Be a voter
And,
vote
and
on
you can
November
enroll,
6th.
and you can sign up to vote as late as the day of the vote.
Yeah, and you can vote early. You can
And
vote
that's
right now.
Right now. And you can go through the internet too and get all the forms
If you're
to
not
vote.
registered, you can still register and vote.
Right.
So thank you so much, Okemo Valley TV. This has been great.